Welcome to our introductory course on moral philosophy. Today, we're going to lay some of the groundwork for this class by discussing the basis of moral philosophy, value. Let's begin with the basic DNA of most ethical claims, good and bad. What exactly we mean by good depends on our particular philosophical angle and is the subject of a later video, but it tends to come down to fulfilling central elements of what it means to be human. Good things let us fulfill our purpose, or accomplish our duty, to exercise reason and agency, or create pleasure and flourishing. Bad things impede those. They stop us from being ideal people, or from exercising our will, or they just plain hurt us. It's a question of value. Generally, we talk about three different kinds of value. Intrinsic value is something that is good for its own sake. Something with intrinsic value would still be good, even if we didn't combine it with anything else or do anything with it. Love, for example, is always good just because it's love. And the suffering of innocence is always bad, just because innocence shouldn't suffer. Often, we can tell that something has intrinsic value because we tend to commit what's called a no true Scotsman fallacy, or an appeal to purity if you want to be less fun, when they're challenged. Macbeth might say, "No true Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge." And Macduff responds, "But I'm from Edinburgh, and I put sugar on my porridge." To which Macbeth responds, "Then you're no true Scotsman." And that's why I gave up on my theatre minor. In other words, if you said, "But love isn't always good, what about when we love something that's bad for us?" it's probable that I might answer, "Then that isn't really love." Intrinsic values feel protected and special because, by definition, they don't have much proof for their goodness or badness. They just are. Instrumental value, on the other hand, has to do with the effect something has on the world. In this sense, water has a great deal of instrumental value. Water plays a crucial role in a lot of culture and civilization. It promotes flourishing and it brings pleasure. Dog poop, on the other hand, is smelly and unpleasant. There's not a lot we can do with it. And yes, too much water can be very bad for you, and dogs do need to excrete all the frankly inedible things they eat, so in that sense, their instrumental value can vary. This variance helps us recognize that instrumental value is different than being good or bad simply in and of itself. Instrumental values derive their value from their relationship to intrinsic values. Water is not useful by itself, but rather because it can promote civilization, which we value perhaps both in and of itself and because it promotes flourishing, making it both instrumental and intrinsic, and we value flourishing because life is valuable in and of itself. As we get up toward the top of this hierarchy, we will encounter intrinsic values that are what we call foundational values. In other words, they are the source from which all other goodness flows. Often, these foundational values are moral, kindness, love, justice, but they can also be non-moral, pleasure, aesthetics, or, in the case of some ancient Greeks, for example, mathematical completeness. And so, to recap, we have foundational values, both moral and non-moral, from which all other values are derived. These values are intrinsic, which is to say, they are good for their own sake. And from those intrinsic values, we derive instrumental values, which help us to achieve those intrinsic and foundational values. Anything on the positive side of these values is good. Anything on the negative, or that impedes the positive, is bad. When we describe something's value, its goodness or badness, we tend to appeal to normative claims, statements about how things should be. In everyday conversation, these claims are often implicit, that is, unstated and simply entailed in what we're saying. Cats are good pets because they're cute and loving and playful, entails the normative claim, pet animals should fit a particular aesthetic, cute, and care about me, loving, and interact with their environments in particular ways, playful. Similarly, he's a good person because he's so honest, appeals to the normative value claim, honesty is good. When we make these normative claims, implicitly or explicitly, we're making statements about instrumental and intrinsic values that define how the world should be in its ideal state. The world should be full of love and flourishing and pleasure. Because we're talking about ideal prescriptions, we must distinguish between normative claims about how the world should be and descriptive claims which tell us how the world is. David Hume says we should not confuse an is for an ought. In other words, just because the world is currently a certain way does not make that the right way. Just because innocents do suffer does not make innocent suffering good. Nor do descriptive claims defeat prescriptive value claims. Just because a lot of people in modern business are greedy does not mean that they should be greedy, nor even that they must be greedy. If there is a disjuncture between how the world is and how we think it ought to be, we need to make some normative claims that set out rules or principles or formulae to make it better. And those normative claims are what we call prescriptive. They tell us what to do according to what we value. And those rules help us establish right and wrong, which we'll address in a later video.